Well, bonjour.
Good morning.
And good morning to all of you joining us in person and online today. I want to acknowledge that we gather on the traditional territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, who have stewarded these lands for generations. Our work spans the territories of more than 130 First Nations, whose cultures and histories predate Ontario. We remain committed to building respectful relationships with Indigenous peoples to provide better services and a better shared future. The report I'm releasing today stems from our investigation into a persistent and systemic issue: vulnerable people with developmental disabilities stuck in hospital beds because appropriate living spaces and supports are simply not available. Le rapport que je rends public aujourd'hui découle de mon enquête.
The report I am releasing today stems from our investigation into a persistent and systemic issue: vulnerable people with developmental disabilities stuck in hospital beds because appropriate supportive living spaces and supports are simply not available.
And we know there are many more that we haven't heard from. In many cases, it's been advocates, social workers, and hospital staff who have reached out to us, often expressing profound despair at the situations they are witnessing. They have helped us identify dozens of challenging and frankly unacceptable cases across the province. This report highlights 7 individuals who languished in hospitals, sometimes restrained, for months or years. And they weren't there for medical reasons, but because there was nowhere else for them to go. In case after case, their conditions worsened in hospital. And we must remember that the people at the heart of this report are among society's most vulnerable. They and their caregivers are navigating incredibly complex realities: autism, cerebral palsy, anxiety, obsessive-compulsive disorders, schizophrenia, intellectual delays, seizure disorders, and a range of mental health and physical challenges. Many have what is known as dual diagnosis, and far too often they are languishing in hospitals for months at a time because there is no adequate system to ensure a timely transition out of hospital and into developmental supports and services that they actually need. There are many more across Ontario, isolated in hospitals, instead of being supported in the community, occupying beds needed for acute care. This is unacceptable. Il y en a beaucoup d'autres en Ontario.
There are many more across Ontario, isolated in hospitals instead of being supported in the community, occupying beds needed for acute care. This is unacceptable.
They need coordinated, appropriate support in the community. The fact that our system continues to rely on hospitals as a default placement is not just inefficient, it's unfair, inappropriate, and profoundly harmful to them and their families. Now, I know that everyone working on the front lines of this system is doing their best with the resources that they have. Hospital staff do not have the training or resources to manage the complex and sometimes challenging needs of alternate level of care patients. Ministry of Children, Community, and Social Services regional staff are also caring people who genuinely want to offer solutions. The problem is not the people, it's the system itself, which is fragmented, under-resourced, and inadequate. Those responsible for finding appropriate housing, supports, and services told us the same thing again and again. They simply lack options. Often, if a space is found, there is no funding, or when the funding exists, no agency has room. And even when a bed is available, many of these individuals require far more than a physical space. They need psychological, behavioral, and developmental supports that are too often unavailable. Experts suggest that the number of people in Ontario who need these high levels of support is not astronomical. With proper investments and structural planning, their needs could be met far more efficiently and far more humanely than leaving them in languishing on hospitals, sometimes under restraint for months or years. This issue is not new. In 2016, my report, Nowhere to Turn, documented hundreds of similar cases. People in hospitals, shelters, even jails, because suitable settings could not be found. Our recommendations were all accepted, and for a few years we saw progress. But progress stalled, and our recommendations were never fully implemented. In recent years, we have seen things get worse. There has been an increase in the number of adults with developmental disabilities and complex needs, many of whom depend on aging caregivers who can no longer meet their needs. The result is institutionalization in hospital by default, where the developmental services sector is stretched beyond capacity. Hospitals are not designed for this, and as our report shows, prolonged hospitalization can worsen behaviors and conditions, making eventual transition even harder and more costly. The financial costs to the province are enormous. Housing someone in a hospital bed for years is extraordinarily expensive for both the healthcare and developmental services systems. And the longer people remain in hospital, often under chemical or physical restraints, the more that their needs grow, multiplying future costs. In this new investigation, we also found that transition projects were ad hoc and short-lived. A major issue is the siloed approach between the Ministry of Health and the Ministry of Children, Community and Social Services. Efforts have been reactive more than proactive. We spoke with more than 120 people, individuals affected, their families, sector experts, and ministry officials, and I thank them for sharing their experiences and working towards solutions. The human costs of the current situation are immense and affect all Ontarians, and it will worsen without urgent, coordinated action. Real progress requires the two ministries to work together. Le prix humain de la situation actuelle est énorme.
The human costs of the current situation are immense and affect all Ontarians. It will worsen without urgent, coordinated action. Real progress requires the two ministries to work together.
Improve the availability, transparency, and integration of supports for people with developmental disabilities and complex needs. Most importantly, I call on the ministries to bridge the divide between the health and developmental services sectors and undertake proactive system planning to reduce unnecessary hospitalization. This includes establishing a joint planning forum, creating more supportive living options through improved capital planning, strengthening recruitment and retention, including French-speaking staff, improving data collection and information sharing. Mes recommandations comprennent l'établissement.
My recommendations include establishing a joint planning forum, creating more supportive living options through improved capital planning, strengthening recruitment and retention, including French-speaking staff, improving data collection and information sharing.
Accepted all of my recommendations. Les ministères ont accepté tous mes recommandations.
The ministries have accepted all of my recommendations.
And with my office and sector partners, to ensure people with developmental disabilities and complex needs receive the right supports in the right place. We will continue resolving individual cases and publicly report on the results of these recommendations. Thank you. I'm happy to take your questions. Je prendrai vos questions.
So,
I'm happy to take your questions.
Supportive living options, are you talking about group homes, or could you explain more specifically what that would be?
Yeah, it would be a variety of options. Let's remember that back in the 1970s, when society became aware of what was happening in institutions, there was shock and people were appalled, and there was a call for reform. And the promise was back then that people were not going to be institutionalized. People with complex needs, disabilities were not going to be institutionalized. And the plan was to offer supports and services in the community. And, it's been 50 years, and those promises have never been fully realized. So what we do have now is a patchwork of agencies and supports and options which are not meeting the needs, especially for those with the most complex needs. And as I said earlier, it's not just about having a bed or housing arrangements, it's the supports, it's the behavioral and psychological supports that are needed for these people. Investment, attention is required for the problem. As I said, the numbers are not astronomical. We're not talking about tens of thousands of people. And yet the cost to the system, the cost to the province is enormous. We had one person that was interviewed by the investigators who said, you could put somebody at the Four Seasons with a nurse 24 hours a day and it would be cheaper than having them in hospital. So I think that was a very telling commentary.
Dans votre rapport, vous parlez du code de
report, you are talking about Look Code, which is a Franco-Ontarian with complex needs. He needs complex services. He's also a Franco-Ontarian. How come having access to French services, French language services is important in that case? Answer. This is another layer of complexity. This individual has complex needs. As I said, there is also already a shortage of services, a shortage of housing. The situation is already difficult for people with complex needs to have access to care. And if we add the language layer, we can see that less people have access to those services. This is a really important question.
To follow your recommendations, but like you talked about what happened in the past with previous government, they didn't follow through. Like, do you have worries that could happen again?
Well, I think that what the current situation, we're raising awareness with this report and with the work that we've done with the stakeholders. What I would say is, I think, I know that the people in the front lines want things to change. The stakeholders want things to change. By raising awareness, hopefully society will say this is not acceptable and call for change. And so I don't know how much, the executive branch was aware of this, but they'll be aware of it now. And so we always follow up with these investigations, follow up and monitor the implementation of these recommendations. The ministries report back to us on a regular basis, and we'll continue to work with this and continue to raise awareness about what's going on, report on the progress of the implementation of our recommendations. I'm hopeful that society and the people of Ontario will say this is not acceptable and we want things to change and get behind that.
Could you talk about maybe one of the cases that was the most upsetting for you to delve into?
Well, I can't say that there was one. I think that the whole situation is very troubling. It's unfair. It's when you read the interview summaries, the people involved, like, this is really taking a toll on the people that work in the system. Hospital staff are heartbroken and overwhelmed by watching somebody. They're caregivers. I mean, they chose that profession because they're caring people, and they're watching people deteriorate in their care because they don't have the resources or the ability to give them what their complex needs require. People working in developmental services sector looking for options. I mean, it's hard, and it takes a toll on people after months and months not being able to find suitable supports for these people, and we heard that loud and clear.
Dans votre rapport, justement, les cas sont...
In your report, you have very troubling cases. You are talking about people who are being restrained in their beds under medication. We have questions. Is this a question of mistreatment? Negligence? Answer. Care is needed. We know that people can have complex behavioral issues. They can be violent. We did not think about any abuse. We want to make sure that everyone is safe. some people do not have the tools nor the training to face this type of issues. It is very unfortunate. This is why we need to change things.
Man who, very troubling. Any idea how someone got to that age? I guess he was in his late 40s by the time he landed in hospital. Then it took another couple of years for a hospital staffer to recognize the developmental disabilities. Like, how could someone like that exist for decades and not be flagged as having developmental disabilities and getting like some kind of attention?
Yeah. Well, you know, that's a big question. I think what the problem is there is no system in place for, first of all, recognizing and diagnosing, but then later on treating these people. And I think that's what the report speaks to, is the fact that, you know, so much is ad hoc, so much is reactive rather than proactive. Whereas if there was a system in place of agencies and resources and housing and supports, that this would not happen and things would not last that long. That's the hope, and that's what we're trying to address with the recommendations.
How do you think the two ministries could have dropped the ball with so many people, so many times over so many years after your 2016 report?
Well, to be fair, there was some progress made. I'm thinking in terms of corrections in the criminal justice sector. There were some steps taken there, concrete steps to divert people and get them help. I think that the challenges in this sector, this area, the people in hospitals, is more complex because the lack of communication, the siloed approach, and so. The developmental services didn't know about all the people in hospital because there was not that linkage, that reporting relationship, that collaboration, and that's the main thing that we're calling for. And I think that's the biggest difference in this set of recommendations from 2016 is now we're addressing two ministries. We're urging them to collaborate, to set up that joint planning forum, and to really plan together and act together to fill these gaps that we've identified.
What are you suggesting that the government should do for French language services? Do you think we should just say, like, we need to recruit more Franco-Ontarian individuals? Answer: we have been saying that the first step when offering French language services is planning. Planning is essential. We are calling on both ministries to start planning for French language services. We don't want to plan on this when we don't have any other choice. We need a general plan. This will help us find solutions to this problem.
These are people who are being, like, I don't know the right word, bound in their bed for hours and hours. I'm trying to think, I think, what was it, 20 hours a day in one case? Like, and we're talking about months on end.
Yeah.
I don't know.
No, it's shocking. It's shocking, and it's appalling, and it's very unfortunate. And, you know, we had worker after worker and frontline staff after frontline staff telling us it's inhumane, it bothers us, it troubles us, it breaks our heart to have to operate in these conditions. And so that's why we're doing this again, because, you know, this report came out because it's so important. And I don't think that I want to believe that if, you know, the majority of society knew about these situations, they would say it's unacceptable, and they would urge our elected representatives to take action on this, to address it.
And yet those workers are the ones who are doing it.
Well, they're doing it out of necessity, right? They're providing the level of care that they can with the resources that they have. And again, I said it earlier, the call is we don't have the resources, and they, in large number, came to us to report these problems, to complain about the situations that they're finding themselves in, because they are caring people, and they want to provide more appropriate care and more appropriate supports. Okay. Well, thank you, everybody. Thank you for your interest. Oh, okay. While we're waiting, just to add one, what I meant to say and to sum it up is that everybody is doing the best they can with the resources they have. That was the point I was trying to make. Okay.
Okay, no caller.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you, everybody. Take care.